We are making a hat today, and Monty and I are back to show you how to do that. So I'm gonna just, I think my stream is working okay. Kind of don't want to watch myself because there's a delay. All right, I think technically, hopefully this is working correctly. I'm just gonna quickly head over here, and so I can see the chat. Okay, so we're gonna make this hat, the hat that I am wearing. And if you want to see, I have another version of this hat. So it's a very simple sun hat. We're going to make one today. I'm going to take these off. Oh, you know what? Maybe I'll keep it on. Maybe I'll wear it while I do the live stream. But I want the seam in the front. I'm going to wear the yellow one. What am I doing here? This one I have to have the seam in the front because I made it wrong. And I'll explain that when I get to it. Okay, so we've got the hat pattern. I'm going to go to the overhead camera and show you what we've got here. We can get rid of the timer. And I do have my iron, so if you're doing this with me, you may want to grab that. But I wanted to just show you real quick. If you print out the pattern, it's 4 pieces. When you put this one together, and to get this pattern, you can just go over to hipstitch.co/lunchbreak. And you can print it out. And when you tape it together, the thing that I want you to remember is these little X's need to line up. So when you're putting together the first 2, these little X's will line up. Then your hat piece will be correct. If you could just get out of our way for just a second, Monty. So then that hat piece lines up. And then same with the pieces above. These X's line up with each other. You can kind of see through the paper. And then the hat pieces are correct. And then that goes for this piece as well. So those X's here, they line up, and then you get your round hat piece, okay? I already taped mine together, so I'm going to use that. But I just wanted to show you in case you're a little confused by how that goes together. So real quick, my pieces are very wrinkly, but I'm just gonna deal with it because I didn't have a chance to just press them. But I have the iron plugged in, which is dangerously close to the cat's tail, but what are you gonna do? Let's see, and I cut out some lining pieces too. Is that big enough? No. What do I want to do? I guess I just wanted it to be like this. So for this, as we cut it out, the hat side, we're doing 2 fabric for the outside, which is my gray, 2 lining, and they can just be like right on top of each other. They don't have to be right sides together or anything because we don't have to worry about that. I'm gonna just cut all 4 of these at once for the sake of time. So I've pinned my pattern to my 4 fabric pieces. And I just want you to know that Monty, he's really into this because like he's did not even come over and lay on this table until I started doing this. It's very strange. I don't know if he thinks, I don't know why he does it. He wants to help, even though he's not a very big help. So 4 pieces total. For the hat side, you've got to have strong hands and sharp scissors to cut through all these layers. Especially I chose kind of thicker fabrics because I like the way that looks better. If you're just using thin fabrics, that's fine too. But you'll notice it's just not as stiff. All right, 2 and 2 for the hat sides. Then I've got my hat top, right? So for this one, it's 1 fabric and 1 lining. So I'm going to go ahead and oh, my third camera. There it is. Okay, sorry. I was just fussing over a technical thing. So 1 fabric, 1 interfacing, and 1 lining. So I'm just going to do the fabric and the lining. I'm going to do all my interfacings at once in just a second when I grab my interfacing. And I'll talk a little bit about what interfacing is and why you want it for projects like this. And lastly, we've got the brim, which we need 4 fabrics. So I actually cut some pieces that are sort of the right sizes, some really wrinkled gray denim. Make sure I am on, you know what, since this one seems to be bigger, I'll put this one on top. Make sure I can get what I need from this piece. There we go. So we don't need any linings because this is the brim. So the brim is the same on the inside, whereas the lining is different for the side and for the top. So the brim here is what we're doing, cutting now. So that's why it's all 1 fabric. Eleanor seems to think that my cat Monty is into couture. I don't think that's it, but I could be wrong. I think he just likes to be the center of attention. All right, there he is. And he likes to look out the window. There's a good window right up here. This is really big. Hat brim. Okay, interfacing. Interfacing is the white stuff that we add to projects like hats and purses, and we can put it on collars and it makes it stiffer and heavier. So we are going to add a little bit to our hat. I'm just going to ask you to maybe do that. Okay. So for the hat brim, we want 4 layers of interfacing because we're going to put it on all 4 of the brims. So it usually comes kind of like this. I'm usually really careful about how I cut my interfacing because I really don't like to waste it, but because I'm just doing this for the sake of time today, I'm not really going to be very conscientious about cutting my interfacing, but know that I would be a little bit more careful about how I put it on here. But for today, I'm just trying to do it quick. one end, make sure that fits. Great. So now I've got 4 that I can cut out all at once. Actually, it's not going to waste that much fabric. I'll save the scraps. I always save all of my interfacing scraps because you can like pile them on top of each other. Like if you're trying to interface something that's small, you can use little scrap pieces to cover whatever you need covered with interfacing. So I keep it in a little separate bin because you never know. Like that I would definitely save. And then interfacing can come as a fusible interfacing, or it can come without fusible glue on it. And what that means is that there's an actual glue on the interfacing on one side. So if you have a fusible interfacing, you guys want to be really careful and figure out which is the side that has the glue on it. You can usually tell it's like shiny or it feels different. So I know that my glue is on this side. So when I go to put it on my actual brim, I'm going to put the wrong side up and then put the glue side down onto the wrong side. And that was why I didn't really care that everything's so wrinkled, because now I'm going to iron this on, which is going to flatten it out. It's going to glue the interfacing on, but it's also going to, flatten. Well, I also can just do this before I go. Ooh, Monty does not like the iron. I think he feels the heat. He's gone now. Okay, putting the interfacing. Really careful to make sure that the glue side is down, because there's nothing worse than realizing that you put the glue side up and then it's sticking to your iron, and then you have to get out the special stuff that cleans your iron, and it's a whole thing. So there we go. Interfacing is really important on the brim. It makes it nice and stiff. The 2 that I've made so far, one was just a quilter's cotton and one was like a twill, a little bit heavier, and I really noticed a difference. I really like, I like them both, but I like how the brim feels on the one that's twill, because it's just heavier and stiffer. So if you want to bend the brim, it works a little better because there's nice, it's stiffer and there's good amount of weight to it because of the interfacing. So there's 2. This is probably what takes the most time with this project, is just getting all the little pieces cut and interfaced. I don't want to rush and forget and put the interfacing the wrong side up. That would really stink. There we go. And it doesn't take a whole lot to get the interfacing to stick. I don't use any steam when I'm putting interfacing on, and I just move it over slowly, and you can leave it, but then it sticks on there. And if you feel like it's not sticking that great, you can always flip it over and iron on the other side. All right, so now we have our 4 brim pieces. I'm gonna put that aside. we need one interfacing for the hat top. So, do I have any big enough scraps? Let's see. No. Nope. I could piece it, but I am... Actually, you know what? I'll do that. I'll show you how to piece it together. So, if I interface the top, here's how you can use scrap interfacing. So what I do is I'll lay it glue side down and cover as much. Oh wow, actually I'm almost covering the whole thing. Excellent. But now be really careful, don't iron. That's why this little mini iron is really helpful. Don't iron beyond the circle of the hat top. Okay, because you don't want the interfacing to stick to your ironing board, and it might just a little bit, but do the best you can to just hit it on the circle, and then there it is, and then you can go ahead and cut the rest away. Don't cut the fabric, but trim the interfacing. That was actually really good. I didn't think it was going to fit the whole circle on, but it did. And then once that's off, I will just get it with the iron one more time. Make sure it's real secure. Put that in my done pile. And then, let's see, I need for the hat side 2 interfacings. So, and that'll go on there, and I need 2. So, let's see. I'll just do the same deal and fold. Make sure I cut a big enough piece that will fit. Indeed. Cut. Get that out of the way. Okay. So Eleanor's asking what interfacing I am using, and I don't have, I always take all the plastic off of it when I store it, so that is a really great question, but I will, Eleanor, I will let you know, because I don't know off the top of my head what it is. It's a Pellon, it's a lightweight, but I can find out the number for you. And then I can also post it in the comments below so you can see if you're watching this after the live stream. Okay, so I'll put my linings over in my pile. And then last but not least, these last hat sides need to get interfaced. So once again, I will get some of the wrinkles out first, get the interfacing on with the glue side down. Okay, all of our pieces are interfaced. Yay. So I think I'm going to remove my ironing board and put my iron out of reach so it's not nearby to burn me. Let's hope. We might need it in a little bit though. Okay, I'm going to start with my hat sides. I can take those and I'm going to put them right sides together, and I'm going to pin each of the sides, and I'm going to sew that with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So pins on both sides, and I'm going to do that with both the outside and the lining. So putting those together, pin, pin, and pin and pin. Okay, now those are ready to go. I think the other thing I'm going to do is I'm also going to get the brims together because it's the same idea. I'm going to put 2 of the brim pieces. They both have interfacing on them. I'm going to put those right sides together, and then I'm going to pin this side here because that's where I'm going to sew. And there we go. And same thing, I'm going to sew it with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Make sure you don't have any interfacing hanging over because that will be showing if you don't take a big enough seam allowance. It's the same thing. And then I've got 2 other brim pieces. Basically, we're doing the same thing over here. Okay. And then it's finally time to sew. I hope I have white thread on here. Oh, I do. Okay. I'm going to do white thread so you will see that top stitching on the brim and it will be white. Okay, so here's my sewing machine. I've got just the default stitch length, the stitch with the 0 because I'm going to do a straight stitch. My needle's in the middle, and I'm just going to line up the edge that I've pinned. And since I'm doing a bunch of sewing, I'm going to line up the next one. So I'll do all of them on one side. And this is a great little time-saving thing if you want to try it. If not, you know, obviously you can take them off in between. And then once you've got the 4, you can cut that off. I don't know if that's sucked in there. And then now you've got a little flag of pieces that you need to cut apart and do the exact same thing on the other side. Seems, I'll just make sure that's down. and pull it off. All right, so let's go back to the overhead camera and cut everything apart and trim any threads. So here's a brim and a brim. And then hat side and, oh no, hat side, brim and brim. Okay, so next up, we are going to put the two brims together. So I'm doing this from memory. I hope I'm doing it right. Just kidding. Now, you want to put the two brims together. I like to open up my seam allowances and put the two brims together, right sides facing. So I'm opening up that seam allowance, I'm opening up this seam allowance, putting them right on top of each other, and then sticking a pin. Okay. And then, same over here. See how I'm opening up that seam allowance, and you can press them, that's fine. I am just finger pressing them and then using a pin to make them stay open, and I'm going to be really conscious of that when I sew to make sure that they stay open. And then I'm going to continue around the outer edge of the hat. And just keeping my raw edges together, pinning it all the way around. Okay, same over here, making sure to line up the edges and then pinning. Okay, so now I have a big circle with pins all the way around. While I'm over here pinning, I'm going to turn the outside of my hat right side out, and I'm going to stick my lining inside it. Actually, no, I'm not doing that. What am I doing? I am putting the lining of my hat together. That's the next step. So we want the lining and the sides together. But before we do that, we need to find the 4 points of the oval. So I fold it in half, stick 2 pins on the fold line, and then I'm going to fold it the other way, lining up the pins. Make sure that's a little flatter. You can actually usually just crease it, finger press it, and where you see your crease lines, you can stick a pin, and you can stick a pin. And then you want your seams to be on the side. This is going to be the front of the hat. The seam will wind up here. But what I like to do too is not only have the 2 points where the seams are marked with pins. I'll get those. But then I can get the other 2 as well. So if I line up those 2 pins, then I can find the front of the hat and the back of the hat. Right? So now we have the 4 points of the side of the hat and the 4 points of the top of the hat, and those need to go together. So front of hat does not get pinned to a seam, so I'll match those 2 pins up. The side of the hat does get pinned to where that seam is. Those line up, and it's pretty easy. It's like the pins just line up, and that's the beauty of finding the 4 equidistant points on these ovals. And then you can easily sew it together. So I'll pin those 4 points, and then I also like to stick 1 pin in the in-between. So I'll stick 1 more. So I'm going to have a total of 8 pins on this part, this circle, the top of the hat, sewing to the side of the hat. So 8 pins here. And then you guessed it. So yeah, I'm totally getting like a whole bunch of things to sew. I hope that's okay. I'm not just automatically sewing what I pin. I like to pin a couple things, especially if we're repeating. So same deal. So I'm going to go put that back inside out, pinning at, or just marking with a pin at each of the seams on the side of the hat, then lining up those seams and pins and marking the front and the back. Okay, there we go. Same on here. Fold it in half the long way. Make a crease line. 1, 2, and then bring those, well, if I made that pin a little straighter, it would be easier to see what's happening here. Bring those pins together, crease, and then stick 2 pins on that crease line. And then front and back. Front, no seam in the front. Pin it together. Pin that together. Pin that together. And then 1 more pin in between. For a total of 8 pins around the top. And then we've got 3 things that we're going to be able to sew. At once. Let's see. Last pin. Okay, so let's go back to the first thing we pinned. We've got the brim. We pinned her on the outside, so that's where we're going to sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So here we go. Doesn't matter where you start, because it's a circle, you just come back to where you first sewed. So in order to make sure this stays open, I'm just going to use my fingers to make sure on both the top and bottom the seam allowances are spread apart. And because this is a curve, just make sure, you know, you're stopping every so often and adjusting so you stay along the curved edge. again, I'm going to make sure that my seam allowances are spread apart when I go over them right here. Put it aside. Alright, so now I'm going to sew, and this is a little trickier. I want you to go really slow. I'm going to sew so that the top of my hat is showing, okay? And I'm just going to slide it under and do a little at a time, because you've really got to make sure that you're keeping the edges lined up. And every time you stop, put that needle down so it doesn't move around when you're adjusting. And then again, just making sure you're always aligned. I'm gonna bring that so you can get it to be a little closer. Does fit on there perfectly. That's why I really do like this pattern. Because if you look at it, there's not a lot of bumps where it doesn't. I mean, I've got one little jump right there. I could take that out and fix it, but I'm not going to. It's not that big a deal. But it fits on there pretty well. And then same thing with the lining one. Get a little closer. And doesn't matter where you start. You can sew with the side up, but I do think it's easier to sew with the top up. Oops, machine is stuck in back stitch. Okay, back to the table. I am going to turn the, I didn't go back to the table. Now I'm back at the table. Go back to the side. I'm going to turn it right side out. Now, so like this little bump here that I've got, I could just take the stitch out right here and fix it. That's a really easy thing to do. However, I'm not going to worry about it. Alright, so there's the top of my hat. And then I'm going to stick the lining inside it. Okay? And when it goes in, spread your seam allowances if they're not staying open, because wrong sides are going to be touching, and I want you to put a pin on the seam. And then I want you to do the same thing over here. Spread the seam allowance, spread the seam allowance, put them together, and stick a pin right on the seam. And then push so that the top of the hat fits very snugly inside, and pin the rest of the hat around the circle. Okay. And I am going to sew this because it's going to make it easier to sew it to the brim when it comes time to sew it to the brim. So that is pinned. And I'm just going to put it aside for now so you can see that's kind of like a little pillbox hat at this point. What I'm going to do now with this is I'm going to carefully, every inch or so, cut little snips into the seam allowance. But I'm not cutting the seam, I'm just going to make it so this allows it to spread when we go to turn it right side out. The brim will look better, basically. It'll look more circular, the way it's supposed to. Just be really careful. And if you end up cutting your seam by mistake, it's not a big deal. Just go back and re-sew the part that you snipped. Okay, and I'm back. So now you go in between the two good fabrics and turn everything right side out. And you can skip ironing on everything except, I feel like, for this. You really want to push this seam out all the way around, and then I'm going to grab my iron and press that really well. Because if you don't, it winds up just looking kind of poofy. So actually, I think what I'll do is stick just like a couple pins here, so then I know it's all lined up the way it's supposed to. And just make sure that especially if you have plastic ball pins like I do, just make the pins off of the fabric, so when you go to iron it, as long as you stay on the fabric, you won't melt your pins. If you've got glass pins, I don't think it's a big deal. I honestly have never really worked with glass pins, but I think that's one of the benefits, is that your iron doesn't melt them. So put on there, grab my iron, and I'm just like kind of rolling this to make sure I'm right at the end and pressing it really well. And see how it just flattens it down so nicely when you press this brim like that? I'm pretty much just avoiding pins as much as I can. And here it feels really bulky. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually right here just going to clip my seam allowance, and I just got rid of that extra bulk, so when I go back in, it sits a little bit flatter. Yeah, that's a lot better. And same thing, I can really feel the difference right here. So I'm going to go in. Get that out of there. Okay, so I took some pins out because I wanted to get to that seam allowance. So I'm going to stick those back in. And I am going to top stitch the top of this, well, top stitch this brim kind of like crazy, because I'm just going to keep going around and around and around, and it creates this kind of cool effect on the brim. And I, like I said, I am doing it in white thread. So here, I'll back it up a little bit, and I'm just gonna start right on the edge. Started. I'm going to lift that up. Ooh, and I already ran out of bobbin. That didn't give me much of a warning, did it? What do I have here? You know what? I'm going to be a little lazy, and I'm going to put... No, I don't want to do that. I want white. I'm spinning a bobbin. See, on my machine it's actually kind of nice, you can keep it threaded. That is probably enough. If, you know, by some chance you're wondering how to do that on your machine, don't hesitate to, we've got a bunch of tutorial videos where I take it step by step, how to do that winding of the bobbin. So if you need a refresher on that, don't hesitate to check that out. Now here is where I left off. I'm gonna snip that. Start right where I left off. And then actually I'm gonna pull it off. start in. And so the way I do it is I will put the edge of my foot. Sorry, I'm doing that so fast. It like probably makes you dizzy to watch. The edge of the foot is now going to ride right on the edge of the stitching that's already there. See, when I start to come back, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to move over and start the next go around. Got row after row after row of stitching. They're all about a ½ inch apart. I'll end it right there because I've got no more room. I love the way the white stitching looks on the gray. And bring it over. We've got the brim. I can get rid of my ironing board for right now. But look at how stiff and great this brim is now. I just love the way that looks with all that top stitching on it. And I've got some random threads here on the underside. I'll just snip all those. And you can see, once you put the hat on, it's going to start looking like an actual hat. But we've got to put that together. So like I said, I always, oops, I just lost a pen. I always base this first, and then I will sew it to the brim. That will be a raw edge that you can cover up with a binding tape, or you can zigzag it. I just ran it through my serger to finish it off, but like I said, you could just sew it, cut the extra, and then zigzag it, which I think I will do since I don't normally use my serger in these in case you don't have one. So let's see if I can get the sewing cam back on. There we go. So I'm gonna do it with a really small seam allowance, so super close to the edge. And you can baste it to make it go faster, because all it is to make this next step easier. to where we started. Bring it back to here. And once again, find those 4 points. So we know the seam in the front and the back. Put those seams together to find the other 2. And I want you to mark them. 1, 2. And then where the pins are in here is where you're going to line up with the pins on here. So same thing. I've got seam on top of seam like this. So that's our first 2 marks. And then I will use my pen to mark here and here. Okay, and then if this is going to be my right side, then I need to have my right side touching. So I have my right sides touching. I'm going to pin my first one, and then I'm going to kind of flip it around, seam to seam. Let's see, I'm just going to do that thing. There we go. Pin to pin. And seam to seam. And just like I did before, I'm going to make one more pin right in the middle. So 8 total pins. When we go to sew this, I want you to take at least a 1/2 inch seam allowance here, if not maybe slightly bigger, 5/8, because then, like I said, you are going to cut off these raw edges if they don't wind up being even, so that you can zigzag them so there's no crazy looking things inside. But you wind up, see, there you go, look at that, it's almost done. You wind up so that this raw edge kind of points into the hat. So if you just want to leave it, I mean, there is no shame in that, in my opinion. All right, so here we go. Oh, let me just get the camera rolling here so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to sew it so that I'm going to do it so that I can see. I'm going to sew on the brim, so therefore it'll be a little bit easier if I remove that and just have the hat going around the free arm. Come on. Oops. The edge, I'm lowering the presser foot. I'm taking a nice seam allowance. And I'm on my way. And same thing. Every time you stop, which should be frequent, put your needle into the fabric. snip, and here is our hat. And just to show you the inside, this is before I cut anything off, before I finish anything. It looks pretty good. If you have a serger, I would put it through with the serger, which is what I've done, and I've washed my hat a couple times. So the serger just protects it and makes that more of a finished edge. Or, like I said, if you don't have a serger, you can cut off some of the seam allowance just to make it all even, and then zigzag that edge with a really tight zigzag. But I will leave you to that. It is 3:02. We have our 1 hour bucket hat. Ooh, that fits like a glove. I did the biggest size, FYI. I don't think I mentioned that. I did the biggest size. Yeah, this brim is like super stiff, and will kind of do whatever I want. Very happy with this hat, and I hope you, if you didn't make one with me today, I hope you do. Let me know how it is. Post a photo of Instagram and make sure you mention Hipstitch Academy. Eleanor is asking when we would put the ribbon in right now. So basically, sorry, if you we're going to put a ribbon in. All the ribbon is you put it. Let me get the overhead. You would just add it here. So let me grab a ribbon. Here's a tape. So this is just bias tape, but it's basically a ribbon. You would just do this right now. So the same seam that we just sewed, you would add the ribbon. I wouldn't do it all at once. I would sew this first, then sew a ribbon all around. The reason I am not putting a ribbon in is I find that anytime I put a ribbon, that eventually gets sort of tucked in and covering that, it tightens it. So I find that I don't put the ribbon on. I prefer to just finish the edge. That's why I didn't do that. But you can see that's a good trick if you decide that your hat is too big. You could put the ribbon in and it'll tighten it up on your head. I don't know, I just tend to get headaches, and I feel like if I put the ribbon in, it winds up too tight, and then it doesn't feel good on my head. So I leave mine without it. But great question. I hope you all had a good time. I did too. Hope you all had a great Memorial Day weekend. I hope to see you in class, a real class, a Zoom class very soon. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. See you next time.